I have something I consider quite big and really critical to this Charlie case with Tyler on trial on the September event. This is something I've worked on for 3 months, and it's pretty important. Let's get into it. There's discovery, legal discovery, where the defense team can go pull out documents from the government and get them into the trial. That's visible in the trial, but also all of us citizens can then pull them out of the trial, and they're documented permanently. And it's almost like this Thomas Massey pulling him off the files there. This other situation, he can pull it by force, and the government has to hand over all these documents. There's a big problem here, a really big problem, and a solution here. So partly before I get into that, there'll be things I'll talk about, which is either the lone wolf, or are there a group more powerful, more and sophisticated beyond that may well have made this happen. And so I'll say IS, and here's the second one, and the first word. So here's the first word there. So that's IS, and that could be the thing, a group of people beyond Tyler, beyond Lone Wolf. And so the aspect here of the investigation is so much has kind of caught a set of evidence of facts of them leaving footprints in this event. And then they lead here. So I built up a list of 175 things that should have been in discovery, in my opinion, and that can be added. And then what these do is these are things that, from me doing deep investigation nonstop since it happened, and others pouring through everything else everybody else has done, that this is my massive list to what we could go pull from the government. And when they hand over all these files in this case, that is not happening now, then it could give us proof to go prove this. Now, there's two tracks of what's going on. There is a local state level trial, and so this is the structural problem. And between both the defense and the prosecution side, they set things down this way that the local law enforcement has almost consider their box, their office, whatever, of storage of evidence that they have at the localized state level. It is what it is. Now, during the trial, they have to hand that over to defense. Now, the FBI and more at the federal level could have investigated a ton, have a lot of files, but so far that's just not going to come over. And there's a tiny little of witness statements and maybe a little bit more, but pretty much the mass majority is by default off and not going to flow over to defense and to the trial, and so we'll never see those, and that's the problem. And my 175 is to go catch those. So if you go look at, this is the list I've pulled out of what defense attorneys have filed, in this case back in September, for what they want for discovery. And it's really going after that local law enforcement, pulling out their list. Very simple list. So my 175 categories that need to be added just are not covered. And this is basically kind of going after local law enforcement's conceptual little office of evidence at the pedestrian level, really reconfirming a lone wolf, and almost things that kind of just are almost like say the writing on the bullet or the writing on a note that may or may not have done by him that seemed like written by a 50-year-old and not a 22-year-old, and things that seem like they were kind of done maybe not by him, but those are the things in discovery, and it almost slam dunks him into a lone wolf. So this has me scratching my head and saying, why is all the other stuff missing? And so I had to go rephrase this, and this is a public request that the defense team go make another submission for expanded discovery for this 175 or most of those. And what happens is, when you have to analyze this from their point of view, will that help their case? And this slide is about, the answer is yes. And so what happens is his charge is for murder, but not attempted murder. So if if it proved that somebody else was caused the death, then he would go scot-free. And so when the discovery is all against kind of almost reconfirming him as the murderer, not pulling information to show others were the cause of murder or ordered it or scheduled or knew about it and aligned stuff and planes and all that, then it locks out the ability to point and show others caused it. And if that can be brought in first in discovery, then that would quickly lead to evidence. Then that would provide somebody else the cause of death. That would get him scot-free. And also it would, even if that's not fully the case, if it was showing that there were others involved, it may not be 100% clear if they caused death necessarily, but they were involved. What happens is when the
4 p.m.
prosecution went through the process to say lone wolf, but it's very clear at the end of the day, and right now this won't happen because discovery is not happening, but if this 175 was pulled in, then it could go show to the jury that others were involved, then they would have doubt about the prosecution and about their claim that it's a lone wolf, because it wouldn't hold water anymore. And they will not convict unless their doubt is so little, there's beyond a reasonable set of doubt that has to be extremely high for a death, kind of a murder case plus the death penalty. And so also, if this stuff pulls out obstruction of justice at the federal level, that suddenly destroys the credibility of the prosecution side, and that's also a great way to get him out. So there's many different avenues that this evidence would sit there and drive up doubt in many different angles, and it would show somebody else possibly a cause of death and put doubt on him doing that stuff. So for the defense to make sense for them to want to do it, it has to advance their case, and I think the answer is all yes on this. So this is the case of 175. I can't read all of them here, so I put a Google Drive document available. You can go get the document and go scan through the list. 175 items. It's available for you. So it's a Google Drive document. Like this one, it is this one, and you would pull it up and you just scroll through it, and they're numbered. And so there's number 4, and so on, and then you can see there and online have debates on the different numbered items. So what do people think about this numbered item here or there? And so it's an easy way to go have discussions about them. Now we'll come back to here with this, and this is stuff that's not in Discovery Now, and I think it is exactly the map that will pull off a massive amount of evidence that something bigger beyond a lone wolf did it, and it would bring out proof. This is like Thomas Massey passing a law that brought out those other files. Once the law passes, the government's forced to hand them all over. This has all that power in the defense attorney if they actually do it. So over here are 3 tracks: top track, middle track, and bottom track. Now, what happens is there's Brady violations. Now, normally the prosecution could go to jail or have big problems if they violate handing over the evidence. So the question you might ask is, well, doesn't Brady violations compel and require the federal law enforcement and everything at the federal level to hand over evidence? And the answer is no. So the part I want to raise to everybody's being informed about is that this is structured such that they can sit there and almost railroad in a lone wolf, slam Tyler into prison, probably a death penalty also, and then really the massive range of files sitting at the federal level never get handed over to the defense. There's a few. There's the witness statements, and maybe a little bit others that will, but pretty much the massive range of everything else by default does not. And they will also go scot-free of Brady violations. Now I'll explain the legal constructs of how that's carried out here. What happens is these three tracks legally have a legal phrase, called a custodial agency that defines one track versus another track. They also call them sovereigns. The top one is called a prosecution team in the legal world, and the middle one's called federal investigative agencies. The bottom one is federal intelligence components or non-prosecuting government entities. Those are different custodial agencies. Now, they structured it to be a state-level case. Now, they can kind of have a pedestrian state level where they just can collect some stuff from Tyler's apartment and have very, very little. If somebody's going to do something not great, almost do that by intention. Their evidence is really, really tiny. Just like that discovery list right now is really, really tiny. And then really the FBI is the one that came in, and there's on the radio that local law enforcement going to the radio to the other said the FBI said no local law enforcement can talk to witnesses. That was right when it happened. Maybe that changed over time later in the day, maybe other days. Local law enforcement definitely talked to them on other days. But that's really strange on where that basically locked up evidence up at the federal level, but now defense is not pulling almost anything from the federal level. So in this case here, the legally there's this umbrella wrapper around one of the custodial agencies called the prosecution team. If it was a federal case, it would hit the FBI and they'd have to all hand them over by default or be in violation of the Brady violations. But now that it's a state level, that legal wrapper, prosecution team, it will include city level law enforcement, county and state level law enforcement. It includes the state level prosecutors, but nothing else. And so they, by default, have to take that top track, take their little small room and hand over the bullets with the writings on them and the very little stuff that they have, and that's what the defense gets. And then defense has to go request more. When I looked at it, they had a tiny list, and it was all pointed back to state level. And so when it's not requested for these other custodial tracks, custodial agency, then the prosecution team, then they don't have to hand it over. They might have proof of many others, of foreign involvement, of powerful things. They might have rooms and rooms and rooms full of evidence, and they just don't have to hand it over by default to the defense attorneys when the defense attorneys doesn't ask for it. And defense can get it. They just have to put in discovery to request it. But when they choose not to, and right now it seems like they're asking for witness statements, which I think will also include the federal level, but I can find almost nothing else coming from the federal level. Maybe as a couple tiny little things, but the massive range is not. So what I spent months doing was taking everybody's investigation and go collecting the massive range for these bottom two tracks that seem to be something that's likely to be substantial to pull out the foot tracks in the snow and their specific requests, and they have a very good elevated chance of possibly a number of them pulling back things that are very substantial and can change the trial, and in ways that could help the defense in a big way that they could and should. And so that 175 fills the range, and the bottom two that I found are completely missing now. And if defense never requests those, then the bottom will never get in trouble with Brady violations because of that process here. To give the scope and severity of this, when the FBI does anything, talks to this person, investigates that, spends their day doing this, they tend to be filling out these 302 forms on everything. And so they just create a pile of them, a mountain of them on an investigation. Now, on trials, it's pretty standard that the defense will go request those, of course. And over here on the left are trials, and that shows that has happened. Now, what happens here is I looked there, and that was completely missing. I was shocked when the FBI came in and took so much leadership, and there's so much of this is beyond a certain one state, and there's so many people flying around, and and international things going on, and it's all going to flow into a mountain of 302s, and the defense is not requesting them, and I'm shocked. So the defense is requesting witness statements, and that's like this minuscule percentage of that. But it makes no sense on why they're not including the 302s. Now here's a timeline, and up here was the 10th, back here in September, and I started investigating pretty nonstop since then. And a lot of this was investigating. Now defense put in the 30th, September 30th, their list of discovery. I kind of act as kind of a librarian and just absorb everything, save it off, and cross-index everything, and go look for finding out various things. So with this, I go work on that, and I have a number of deep videos over on YouTube to kind of go through all the stuff I find. What I did was, by the time I hit this December 20th, I was just kind of so shocked by the discovery and really needed to have this solved, the 175 to get in discovery, because that really will flip the whole case in a whole different direction and show other people culpable, in my opinion. Now, what I did was, by the 20th, I wanted to go off and build the full list. It ended up being 175 categories of things that go in discovery. And then I wanted to go file what's called an amicus brief. And you can go file that with a court. And this is normally nationwide, except for a few states. And then even if defense is like, no, don't bring all that evidence in, I don't want that to be shown, they can say no. Then the prosecutions can say that. Then the defense could also say no. Hey, I don't, for some strange reason, don't want that to happen. But the judge can override both and say, this makes sense. This stuff will lead to the truth coming out. Why not hand it over? FBI 302s, all that stuff is common sense to hand over. The judge can sit there and say yes and approve it. Now, what I found out, over here at a certain time was that Utah was one of those very few states that do not allow it. And everything almost appears that those who picked to do this thing with Charlie, I think they chose Utah for a reason, and this is one of those that no amicus brief is. There's a list. I have other ones I can create another video on. But I had built this full discovery list. So what I want to do now then is I went off and sent that off to the defense legal team, and I FedExed it, plus made an email copy, and that arrived by the 21st of January. And so I have a just kind, open request to please do that. And I think it would be very important for your client, and it's very important for the truth, and to make sure your client does not get convicted when there's a whole bunch of evidence that could be very helpful to the defense and also the truth. And just make sure justice happens for the consequences for the correct people. Now, then over here, I gave them a week and a half until I'm making this video, and then I really want them to, my dream is that they submitted that for discovery. We're in a window where they're allowed to submit more for discovery. This is the time. It's perfect. I gave them a list, teed it all up. They can just go submit it. Now, the issue is over here is a preliminary hearing, and there's even attorneys trying to go submit to try to speed all this up, so that might be pulled in a lot. But the thing is, there's this hard wall that will, here's this gray line right here. We are in the magical window above that where it's trivial for the defense to go expand discovery and pull all this stuff in. And this will bring in incredible evidence, and it'll be very, very powerful. But we're very soon going to go across this line where that all shuts off forever. Now, I want to point out that they cannot ever do discovery again after that line for the rest of the first trial. Even if they can go get an appeal to happen later, they cannot go get later to get discovery to get it to be re-added because they had their time window. And if defense didn't do it, then it's locked out forever. And so this is why it's so critical to take this time where it's a powerful thing. It's like a blank check from Thomas Massey to go file, require the government to hand over files. They have all the power by defense, and They just have to use it. So over here, from a legal and strategic point of view, I want to point out this other sad case back in 1963, and that happened this December down here on Below to John. And what happened there was they also very intentionally wanted to have a lone wolf to slam dunk and close out. And they also needed to have that to be a state level trial. And they also do the same thing because discovery goes off to local law enforcement. They can have very little, and then it can make sure the federal level does not have to hand over anything. And they can, by the same structure, not be in trouble with that the Brady violations. So it's just important to understand is following a pattern, that just is allowing the Brady violations to not happen and the information to not be handed over. So this stuff is really critical. And let's go over here. So going over each of the 175 doesn't make sense for time. I want you to go up to open the document and read them yourselves. I have a map here, and I want to go cycle through them in the map. And so these are the categories that those 175, most of them sit within one of these categories here. And so it's just if they just go take the 175 and put it in the legal discovery, the federal level right now that's handing over almost zero in evidence, they will, and be forced to hand it all over by law. And so over here is the mic and the factory, and over here with the one before, which was acoustics and the ballistics, the FBI has the best labs, but local law enforcement does not have as much. And so if the FBI did a ton, it's sitting there and it will never get to see the eyes of the defense or the trial. And that's true for all of this stuff here. Those distraction people, there's cell towers. This is the thing where the FBI, if they have a superpower, it's here. Cell towers are constantly talking to phones, even when they're in your pocket. They're broadcasting your location, have you triangulated down to just 5 feet, 10 feet. And so all the rent-a-cars going around, were they at his apartment the night before, the day before? Were there a group of visitors involved that were at his apartment the day before? Where were those rent-a-cars traveling around? Who were they meeting with? Coming off of the airplane to rental cars to the thing. There were 12 international people that massively raised alarms with U.S. intel. They had those 12 phones, and the FBI can sit there and open them up completely, map them where they traveled around town, how they got in, how they got out, what they got involved with, who they met up with. They can just map everything out among the 3,000 plus people there and everything else going on in the airport and everything else around here. And it's crazy that's not being requested. And that's common for other criminal trials to go hand that block over to the defense. Now, there's people around that tent, and that not just the security team, but non-security team. There were people there that people don't know and recognize. There's the truck. There's a whole bunch of things going on. And there's the FBI probably has a room full of stuff, and that could all be handed over, and that might provide stuff of possible value. And over here is the financial transactions. I think there's real stuff going on here, and I won't go into that in this video, but why is that not included? That's pretty standard in these ones. Other suspects, there was a construction site on the edge of UVU, and people there thought the person who did it was there coming and running through and getting away, and they called the police because it raised all these alarms. And the question is, why is that not being requested? Because that raised a million red alarms. Another suspect. There's a ton of things on why that needs to be followed up on. The autopsy is in the request, but I think there's more in this category. Airplanes and airports is actually really important stuff there, and the document goes through all the meat of that. And then over here, rental cars that came from there. People were claimed they were specialized, blacked out windows. They did tradecraft. They cycled through license plates. There was one, people meant that there was where Tyler went afterwards to a strip mall. One of those cars likely came to be there at the same time and place, possibly. There's just a whole bunch of stuff with this, and none of it's requested. Who knew before? This would uncover a whole bunch. Now, U.S. Intel, we have over 100,000 people, employees in the U.S. government and U.S. intelligence, completely vacuuming up all knowledge into the databases and collections and everything else. And there are trials where they go submit that, and that goes off to U.S. intelligence, and U.S. intelligence has to hand over the right set of things, and that could sit there and take those planes that flew down, transponder off, hit into Egyptian airspace, military intelligence ones, then turned on the transponder, then flew over to the U.S. They can sit there and find out where they came from while they were traveling down to Egypt with their transponders off, and so there's a ton of things across all the board of this the U.S. intelligence has collected in their databases. They could hand over and would be required to in a court case with discovery. Other trials do it. I'll list them at the end that they've done that in the past, and courts compel it. And that's just not happening here, and there's so much reason it could and should. Over here are incriminating meetings and communication. My document, of course, starts to go through a whole bunch of meta things that should be in discovery, and they're just not. For Juca, there's Wilmington, there's just a whole bunch of things. If the FBI or anybody else did things that were destruction of evidence or obstruction of evidence, obstruction of justice, then those would get them in big trouble, and more importantly, it would cause doubt among the jury and cause to very likely go not convict guilty. There were reports that people said that the FBI kept calling multiple times to make sure they delete videos. There's a whole bunch of other things, actually, and so the document lists those. And why would the defense not request these? These seem like a free way to get them to their goals. And there's a whole bunch of other leads. There's a whole bunch of international side of this, and there's a lot in my document, long list in there, and there's big reasons why they should be doing that in for discovery. And then top officials. So some of those planes that were flying were for top dignitaries of the U.S., and they were coded for those flight numbers to be the very, very top level, senators level and above, and top of heads of departments and various things. They could go pull all that. There were claims of a UN dignitary that was able to fly in and on certain dates in certain places that people alleged were had reason to be looked at for this, and also they had certain level of UN level dignitary things that allow them to get past security that is normally very abnormal, and that could sit there and link a very, very high level person, likely possibly authorizing this ahead of time. So there's a lot of very, very powerful stuff for the case, and that stuff could and should be pulled. So over here's whole another area. Here's the drone area, and that kind of gives you a peek at the stuff that's covering around that 175, these two bottom custodial agency levels. And over here, this guy Thomas was able to pass a law, and it forced all these files to come out, and we're seeing that right now. The defense has that ability and that extreme power to be able to pull out the things beyond the lone wolf. Over here is the defense counsel on the left. Their legal discovery is that power. They have that same power, and it's been used for over 100 years that they get that extreme power. That the government just has to hand it over or go to prison as long as they make the request off to the federal list and to the intelligence side. Then suddenly they're compelled to go hand over everything they got. And so this, you can go look up the document here. Never bother the defense team. I don't want anybody bothering anybody or anything like that. This is all a public kind request in order to be constructive toward in the scope of that trial, in their case, to get justice for their defendant, to not be charged guilty of crimes that would be inappropriate for. And I think with this discovery missing, there's big risks of that happening. With the discovery, they have a lot of ability here. My account is incredibly censored, deboosted, however you want to call it. It will never be seen by anybody unless you repost this. So if you want to have power, use power, repost it. Otherwise, it'll never be seen. I have a whole bunch of deep dive videos like this over on my YouTube channel over there. It's also censored. Nobody can ever find it with search or anything else. It'll never get views ever unless you go there directly. Over here is these things will help defense. It's pretty important for them to be able to solve their goals. This is, again, the list that they're doing currently, all very local law enforcement, all very kind of almost self-statements to try to just kind of close it all out. Whoever wrote on the bullets, whoever wrote that 50-year-old type of wording message claiming to be from him, and everything else. One of my videos is super, super, super important. It shows why was it so critical about going after TPUSA and Charlie and other things here that are way beyond a 22-year-old and Tyler. And the video goes through really, really critical strategic things there. And again, if you don't repost, it'll never be seen by anybody. We don't want to have injustice happen in a railroad, so we want to find justice for the right people involved. And thank you very much.